On July 23, 1952, a revolution began in Egypt with the toppling of King Farouk in a coup d'état by the Free Officers Movement, a group of army officers led by Mohammed Najib and Jamal Abdel Nasser. The Egyptian Revolution of 1952 marked the beginning of a new era of revolutionary politics across the Arab world. It helped accelerate decolonization and strengthened cooperation among newly independent nations during the Cold War through the growth of Third World solidarity. Although the movement initially sought to remove King Farouk, the Free Officers had broader goals. During the revolution's first 3 years, they abolished the constitutional monarchy and the aristocracy in Egypt and Sudan, established a republic, worked to end Britain's long military presence in Egypt, and supported Sudan's independence from the Anglo-Egyptian condominium. The new government adopted a strongly nationalist and anti-imperialist platform, emphasizing Arab nationalism and a policy of non-alignment in global affairs. The revolution quickly faced opposition from Western powers, particularly the United Kingdom and France, which were concerned that rising Arab nationalism could threaten their colonial interests in Africa and the Middle East. Egypt's continued conflict with Israel also remained a major challenge, as the revolutionary government increased its support for the so-called Palestinian cause. These tensions culminated in the 1956 Suez Crisis, when Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt. Although Egypt suffered significant military losses, the outcome was widely viewed as a political victory because Egypt retained control of the Suez Canal for the first time since 1875, boosting national pride and increasing the revolution's influence throughout the Arab world. During the following years, the government introduced sweeping land reforms and launched ambitious industrialization and infrastructure projects that transformed the country's economy and encouraged rapid urban growth. By the 1960s, Arab socialism had become the guiding ideology, and Egypt adopted a centrally planned economic system. Government leaders justified strict limits on political opposition and the banning of multi-party systems, citing concerns over foreign-backed counter-revolution, religious extremism, communist influence, and the ongoing conflict with Israel. Many of these restrictions remained in place until Anwar Sadat became president in 1970, when several revolutionary policies were reduced or reversed. The revolution's early achievements also inspired nationalist and anti-colonial movements elsewhere, including Algeria's struggle against French rule, and encouraged the overthrow of several pro-Western governments and monarchies across the Middle East and North Africa. Today, the revolution is commemorated annually on July 23rd. On July 23, 1967, a riot took place in Detroit, Michigan, when it was composed mainly of confrontations between African American residents and the Detroit Police Department in the early morning hours. The unrest began after police raided an illegal after-hours bar, commonly known as a blind pig, on Detroit's near West Side. The incident quickly escalated into one of the deadliest and most destructive civil disturbances in American history. The violence lasted for 5 days and was even larger than Detroit's 1943 race riot. To restore order, Michigan Governor George W. Romney deployed the Michigan Army National Guard, while President Lyndon B. Johnson authorized the deployment of the United States Army's 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. By the time the violence ended, 43 people had been killed, 1,189 were injured, more than 7,200 people had been arrested, and over 400 buildings had been destroyed. At the time, it was the most severe urban uprising in the United States since the 1863 New York City draft riots during the Civil War. It remained the nation's largest riot until the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which occurred 25 years later. The events received extensive national media coverage through live television broadcasts, newspaper reports, and feature stories in Time and Life magazines. For its reporting on the riot, the Detroit Free Press was awarded the 1968 Pulitzer Prize for general local reporting. The next year, in 1968, The Glenville shootout occurred in the Glenville section of Cleveland, Ohio, when gunfire was exchanged for roughly 4 hours between the Cleveland Police Department and the Black Nationalists of New Libya, a Black Power group. The confrontation resulted in the deaths of 3 police officers, 3 suspects, and 1 bystander, while at least 15 other people, including officers, gunmen, and civilians, were injured. On the first day of the unrest, Cleveland's African-American mayor, Carl Stokes, chose not to deploy white police officers into the neighborhood, after local black community leaders were unable to bring the violence under control. Stokes ordered the Ohio Army National Guard and the full Cleveland Police Department to restore order. The riots came to an end during the early morning hours of July 27th. The violence caused an estimated $2.6 million in property damage and dealt a major blow to Mayor Stokes' Cleveland, now urban, redevelopment program, contributing significantly to its collapse. In 1969, Ahmed Evans was convicted of murder by an all-white jury and sentenced to death, though his sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment. On July 23, 1982, a Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter crashed at Indian Dunes in Valencia, California during the making of the film Twilight Zone the movie, which was released later in 1983. The crash killed actor Vic Morrow and child actors Micah Din Lee and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, who were on the ground, and injured the 6 occupants on board the helicopter. The incident resulted in years of both civil lawsuits and criminal prosecutions involving those responsible for overseeing the film production, including director John Landis. It also prompted the American film industry to adopt stricter safety regulations and new procedures designed to help prevent similar tragedies in the future. The next year, in 1983, Air Canada Flight 143, a Boeing 767-233 from Montreal Dorval International Airport to Edmonton International Airport with a stopover in Ottawa International Airport, ran out of fuel midway through the flight. The aircraft's fuel gauge was inoperative, and an error in calculating the fuel load resulted in the tanks being filled with far less fuel than required. After the engines failed, the flight crew successfully glided the aircraft from 41,000 feet to an emergency landing at a former Royal Canadian Air Force base in Gimli, Manitoba, which had been converted into the Gimli Motorsports Park. No passengers or people on the ground suffered serious injuries, and the aircraft sustained only minor damage. It was repaired, returned to service, and continued flying until its retirement in 2008. The remarkable incident earned the aircraft the nickname Gimli Glider. Investigators determined that the accident resulted from several contributing factors, including a malfunctioning fuel quantity indication system and confusion between pounds and kilograms during fuel calculations. The aircraft's fuel sensors had a history of failures, and the only available replacement sensor was also defective. After maintenance personnel disabled the backup FQIS because of a misunderstanding of the problem, the fuel level had to be measured manually with a dipstick. The flight management computer required the amount of fuel on board to be entered in kilograms, but an incorrect conversion from fuel volume to weight led the pilots and ground crew to believe the aircraft had enough fuel to complete its journey. In reality, it carried only about 55% less fuel than needed, causing both engines to stop halfway to Edmonton, where technicians were waiting to install a functioning fuel sensor borrowed from another airline. The official Board of Inquiry concluded that Air Canada's procedures, training, and operating manuals contributed to the accident. It recommended adopting improved fueling practices and additional safety measures, and were already standard among many U.S. and European airlines. The board also urged Air Canada to convert its entire fleet to the metric system, warning that operating aircraft using both imperial and metric units increased the risk of dangerous errors. On July 23, 1999, All Nippon Airways Flight 61, a Boeing 747-481D from Haneda Airport, Ota, Tokyo, Japan, to New Chitose Airport, Chitose, Hokkaido, Japan, was hijacked by a Japanese passenger named Yuji Nishizawa. About 25 minutes after takeoff at approximately 11:48 a.m., the hijacker, Yuji Nishizawa, used a 20-centimeter kitchen knife to force a flight attendant to grant him access to the cockpit. He ordered 34-year-old First Officer Kazuyuki Koga to leave the flight deck and remained inside with 51-year-old Captain Naoyuki Nagashima, who was able to alert air traffic control that the aircraft had been hijacked. Nishizawa then stabbed the captain in the chest and briefly took control of the aircraft, at one point descending to an altitude of about 300 meters. At 12:09 p.m., members of the cabin crew succeeded in overpowering the hijacker. An off-duty pilot traveling as a passenger, Junji Yamauchi, entered the cockpit and took control of the aircraft, while First Officer Koga returned and informed air traffic controllers of the emergency, reporting that the captain had been stabbed and requesting an ambulance. The aircraft made an emergency landing at Tokyo's Haneda Airport at 12:14 p.m., where Nishizawa was immediately taken into custody. Captain Nagashima was pronounced dead shortly after landing, and Nishizawa was later charged with murder. During the investigation, authorities learned that Nishizawa had taken a large dose of an SSRI antidepressant before the hijacking. He was also known to have a strong interest in flight simulators and told investigators that he hijacked the aircraft because he wanted to fly it beneath Tokyo's Rainbow Bridge. A psychiatric evaluation requested by his defense found that he had Asperger's syndrome. On March 23, 2005, the court ruled that although Nishizawa was guilty of the crime, he was of diminished mental capacity at the time of the offense and was therefore only partially responsible for his actions. A few days later, Judge Hisaharu Yasui sentenced him to life in prison. And on the same day, STS-93 took place when the Space Shuttle Columbia launched on its 26th spaceflight with a crew of 5 astronauts. The primary objective of STS-93 was to deploy the Chandra X-ray Observatory, which at 22,780 kilograms was the heaviest payload ever launched by the Space Shuttle program. The mission also marked Columbia's final flight before entering an extended maintenance and upgrade period. The shuttle did not return to space until STS-109 in March 2002. The original launch attempt was scheduled for July 20th, but it was aborted just 7 seconds. A successful launch was achieved 3 days later. During engine ignition, a loose plug damaged the right engine, causing a hydrogen leak. Liftoff continued, but 5 seconds later, an electrical short disabled the engine controllers. Backup systems kept the engines running, and the shuttle safely reached orbit, though slightly under target speed. The incident led to wiring checks and a change in engine maintenance procedures. A prior launch attempt was aborted due to a false hydrogen reading. The astronaut crew consists of Commander Eileen Collins on her 3rd Space Shuttle mission. Collins made history as the first female to command a Space Shuttle mission. Pilot Jeffrey Ashby on his first Space Shuttle mission. Mission Specialist 1, Catherine Coleman on her 2nd and final Space Shuttle mission. Mission Specialist 2, Flight Engineer Stephen Hawley on his 5th and final Space Shuttle mission and final time in space. And Mission Specialist 3 from France, Michel Tognini, on his 1st and last Space Shuttle mission and his 2nd and final time in space. And on July 23, 2021, the 2020 Summer Olympics were opened in Tokyo, Japan. Tokyo was selected as the host city during the 125th IOC session in Buenos Aires, Argentina, on September 7, 2013. The games were opened by His Majesty the Emperor of Japan, Naruhito, and the Olympic cauldron was lit by Naomi Osaka. Originally planned for July 24th to August 9th, 2020, the Tokyo Summer Olympics were postponed until 2021 after the COVID-19 pandemic spread worldwide. The decision announced on March 24, 2020 marked the first time in Olympic history that the Games were postponed rather than canceled. Despite the delay, organizers kept the Tokyo 2020 name for branding and marketing purposes. Because Japan was under a COVID-19 state of emergency, nearly all events were held without spectators, making these the first Olympic Games conducted without official public attendance. The postponement and extensive pandemic-related safety measures also made the Games the most expensive in Olympic history, with costs exceeding $20 billion. The Tokyo Olympics were the fourth Olympic Games hosted by Japan, following the 1964 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, the 1972 Winter Olympics in Sapporo, and the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano. Tokyo also became the first city in Asia to host the Summer Olympics twice. The Games were the second of the 3 consecutive Olympics held in East Asia, following the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea, and preceding the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, China. Because of the 1-year postponement, they remain the only Olympic Games ever held in an odd-numbered year. Several new events were added to the Olympic program, including 3x3 basketball, freestyle BMX, and mixed-gender team competitions in several sports. Men's Madison cycling returned, while a women's Madison event debuted. Under new International Olympic Committee policies, the host nation was also allowed to introduce sports for a single edition of the Games. Japan selected baseball and softball, karate, sport climbing, surfing, and skateboarding. Of those, sport climbing, surfing, and skateboarding made their Olympic debuts and have remained part of the Olympic program. The United States finished first in the medal standings with 39 gold medals and 113 total medals, narrowly ahead of China, which earned 38 golds and 89 medals. Host nation Japan placed third and achieved its best Olympic performance ever, winning 27 gold medals and 58 medals overall. Great Britain finished fourth, while athletes competing for the Russian Olympic Committee placed fifth in gold medals and third in total medals. Bermuda, the Philippines, and Qatar each won their first Olympic gold medal, while Burkina Faso, San Marino, and Turkmenistan earned their first Olympic medals of any kind. Well, that's all the historical events I have for today. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave a comment down below and subscribe. This is Stephen Luke, and I'll see you next time for another historical update.